Content warning: most of my friends and social media audience is not here for Christian content. This goes into church business and church history, as well as my own theological beliefs. So if you've been harmed by the church, you may benefit from scrolling past this without watching. I felt quite anxious when I saw the protests at the church with an ICE-employed pastor. And with their arrests by the Department of Justice, it's clear that they are going to be abused. I put a lot of stock in the capacity of Miss Levy Armstrong. I know she's had a life in the Covenant Church and even preached for one for a time. I voted for her for mayor in 2017. So I believe her actions in the church were the right ones, and she has my full enthusiastic theological support. Not that she needs it, but I hope that other Christians, particularly Minnesota Christians, will begin paying attention to what her efforts were bringing to light. The ideologies that drive ICE and Border Patrol in this nation are the same ideologies that drove the Third Reich, full stop. Ethnic cleansing, socially beneficial welfare programs like jobs and special employment protections and extra rights, access to services, protection from harm, impunity from laws, all reserved only for the Volk, or the people who are identified as members of the nation. It's an identification which is determined only by the whims of the supreme leader, whose rule alone, filtered down through a coterie of loyalists, creates rights and even personhood itself. Regardless of what you think about the necessity of maintaining borders, and I'm already on the record as saying they're worthless, meaningless symbols of violence, the way that we control the borders in this country is driven by ideological commitments that are indistinguishable from those of the Third Reich, totalizing, and will insert itself into all aspects of life: civic, religious, public, private. There's this historian, Wolfgang Benz, who wrote the Concise History of the Third Reich. It has some really interesting notes about the German churches. He writes, beginning in the spring of 1933, representatives of the Protestant churches clashed with the state, a conflict that subsequently escalated into the Kirchenkampf, a struggle between church and state. The churches resisted the efforts to coordinate them, efforts aimed against the traditional structures of self-government of ecclesiastical organizations. The National Socialists were intent on pushing through a church reform that would have combined the 28 independent Protestant churches of the German states into a single uniform Reich church, overseen or governed by a Reich bishop in accordance with the Führer principles. Subjugation of the individual as part of a Volk community to the absolute will of a strong man who was shown cultic veneration. Does this fucking sound like anyone? So in the US, many Protestant churches have participated in quiet acquiescence of their own or their own kind of enthusiastic support for the rulership of this regime. And it's abundantly clear in the alignment of so-called Christian values and the coalitions of religious leaders, institutions, and independent Christian churches, the alignment of them with the politically far right, the dominionist nationalist Christians, who number in the tens and possibly 100 millions in this country, have been gleefully supportive of the regime. There has not needed to be legislative ordering of those churches. It's been sufficient to stochastically manage the theology of these church bodies, from the podium, out to the pulpit, out to the pew. You could see it as a feedback loop, right? Between pulpit to podium, podium to pulpit. I'm fine, however you want to break down those details. But the result is a large number of church bodies who are pliant to the whims of the regime and are willing to distort their theological commitments in service of their identification with the regime. Under the totalizing effects of like an ethnically supremacist regime, if you have a church leader who serves the violent aims and the violent arms of that regime alongside his service to the church, you have a regime church. It's right, it's the duty of all Christians to resist and decry any alignment of any church body with the ideals of a totalizing regime. As an aside, does this mean that I think military chaplains are also Nazis? Chaplains, you have seen for yourselves what's been done in the name of Christ and in the name of the dear leader. Your continued loyalty to this, it stains your ministry and your soul, and I think you should quit. The best time to do it was January 20th, 2025, and the second best time is now. Quit. I think the Department of Justice's actions and the words of men like the Vice President and the President indicate a very, very dangerous state of affairs for all churches in America. This is the soft launch of a Deutsche Christian movement, an American Christian movement, and I think the message has been made very clear to every church. If you support the regime, we will support you no matter what other Christians say about you. Likewise, if you criticize, whether from a theological or a social justice standpoint, those are two things that I think are inextricably intertwined. Christian churches which are aligned with the regime, right? If you criticize them, then the state will use its power to suppress your beliefs, and will do so in the name of preserving only the freedom of the church body that has employed a regime agent of violence, not those persons like us who decry the violence. After these moments in 1933, when the Reich attempted to take control of all churches in Germany, a small body of pastors and theologians and Christian believers declared that they would not participate in the Deutsche Christian movement. And they formed the Confessing Church. It has a name in German, Bekennende Kirche. I can't pronounce it good. I would like to see something more direct and assertive out of our Protestant and Catholic churches here on Turtle Island. Something more resembling the Confessing Church of the 30s. But it's almost 100 years ago. I think Miss Levy Armstrong's actions were commendable. They were the right thing to do, and more Christians should be doing work like this. The institutional churches should be publishing statements of faith and theological commitments which decry not just the violence of ICE, which we must, also all attempts by the regime to show favoritism for denominations and church bodies who are willing to align with the leader. Seminaries should be teaching future faith leaders the historical value of the confessing church, along with underlying theological and philosophical foundations that and principles that guide them. Our pastors should be confronting their professional colleagues directly and with love that they must repent of any alignment with the regime. Lay people should be encouraged to vocally criticize the barbaric assaults on Christian freedom by the Department of Justice, and should not be afraid to look our fellow lay people in the eye and say, enough, we reject the regime. No one should listen to or respect the proclamation of a pastor who works for ICE. In the old days, the really old days of the 16th and 17th century, when church leaders got mad at each other, they said and did a lot harsher than the nonviolent proclamations that are being made by women like Miss Levy Armstrong. She asked a question: how can you be a pastor of a church while overseeing ICE agents in the field? It's a very good question. But I think anyone watching this, and anyone with even a few minutes of theological education, should know it isn't a question. Our tradition, the one that agrees with the confessing church, demands that we make statements, not questions. You cannot be a pastor of a church and serve ICE. You cannot be a pastor of a church and lead ICE. You have surrendered your allegiance to the gospel, and you've handed it over to a violent regime that rejects Christ. You serve evil, and you must repent of your service and relearn how to lead before you're allowed anywhere near the pulpit. You shouldn't have been there in the first place. And if you are a pastor and you have a member in your church who works for ICE, you tell them to quit. Demand that they quit. Promise that you'll help them survive without the income, but demand that they quit. Whatever it takes, get them out of ICE. This is not the time for quiet reservations, for shocked middle-class discomfort at alleged rudeness for criticizing these churches. The churches that have willingly aligned themselves with the leader and his programs of ethnic cleansing, they must repent. Fuck ICE, love Christ. What if I did? So what if I did? Fuck ice. Love Christ. Or die trying.